Um, Imagine for a second that you are looking at a bill,
Okay.
but it's not a credit card statement or a mortgage. It is a bill for $70 billion.
Which is, yeah, that's a number that is almost impossible to wrap your head around.
It really is. But that is the actual figure currently sitting on the table.
Mm.
And we aren't talking about, a corporate merger or some crazy tech valuation. We are talking about the physical, structural, and financial reconstruction of an entire territory.
An incredibly complex undertaking.
Exactly. It's February 2026, and while the headlines are still asking, will the fighting actually stop?
Mm.
The people with the checkbooks are asking a much harder, much more practical question.
Who is actually going to pay to fix what is broken?
Exactly. Who pays? So welcome to today's deep dive. I'm your host, and I am here to play the learner today. I really want to understand the how of this massive project.
And I am here to help unpack the mechanics, because it's a fascinating collision of high finance, geopolitics, and extreme humanitarian urgency.
And to do that, we are looking at the inaugural meeting of President Trump's Peace Council.
Right, which just wrapped up in Washington, D.C.
At the newly christened Donald J. Trump Institute of Peace.
That's the one. And it's easy to get lost in the political rhetoric, who shook whose hand for the cameras.
Sure.
But for this deep dive, our mission is to ignore the photo ops entirely.
Yes, let's look past the politics.
Okay.
We're pulling from World Bank reports, the Peace Council's official pledge list, and statements from security commanders on the ground. We are just reporting on what the actual proposed machinery is.
And the machinery is honestly one of the most complex things I have ever seen proposed for post-conflict reconstruction.
Okay, so let's jump right into that, because how do you convince the world to invest billions of dollars into a place that is still, frankly, a combat zone?
Well, you start by getting a cosigner with perfect credit.
Okay, I like that analogy. Let's unpack that, because that was the big announcement from World Bank President Ajay Banga.
Right. He unveiled the Gaza Reconstruction and Development Fund.
Now, normally, when I hear the word fund in this kind of geopolitical setting, I just think of a giant donation jar.
A glorified GoFundMe.
Exactly. Countries promise money, and maybe it shows up, maybe it doesn't.
Yeah, that is the standard donor conference model. Everyone pledges, everyone claps, and then 3 years later you realize only maybe 20% of the money has actually arrived.
Which is why these things usually fail.
Exactly. But Bungo is very careful with his wording here. He explicitly stated that the World Bank is acting as a limited trustee.
A limited trustee. That sounds like lawyer speak. What does that actually mean for the money?
It's a mechanism to create trust where literally none exists. Think of the World Bank in this scenario as just the vault and the accountant.
Okay.
They hold the cash, they make sure the books are balanced, they handle the raw transaction mechanics, but, and this is the crucial part, they do not decide where the money goes.
Wait, so they aren't the project managers. They don't pick the contractors to build the roads.
No, not at all. That power sits entirely with the Peace Council.
Okay.
The council says, hey, we need a power plant in Khan Yunis, or we need to clear this specific rubble in Gaza City. They direct the disbursements.
And the World Bank just cuts the check.
Precisely.
Why split the rules up like that? Why not just let the World Bank run the whole show, since they have the development expertise?
Because the World Bank is a technocratic institution, and rebuilding this territory is inherently deeply political.
Right.
The Peace Council, this new body formed under the Trump administration's plan, they want the political control. They want to steer the ship.
But they still need the World Bank's infrastructure.
They need the infrastructure, yes, but more importantly, they need the World Bank's reputation to even get the money in the door in the first place.
Which brings us to a specific detail in your notes. Banga made a really big point in his speech about a AAA rating.
He did. And for the finance nerds listening, this is the real aha moment of the plan. Banga said, because of our AAA rating, we have the ability to tap into private bond proceeds.
Translate that for us. What does a pristine corporate credit score do for a pile of rubble?
It solves the primary issue of risk. Look, if you go to Wall Street right now and say, hey, I'm issuing a Gaza bond, the yields are amazing, but there is a non-zero chance the underlying asset gets blown up next week.
Then you'd get laughed out of the room.
You would. The risk premium would be astronomical. It would immediately be rated as junk status. No pension fund could legally touch it.
So nobody buys the bond. It's radioactive.
Exactly. But if the World Bank issues the bond...
Oh.
Right. The World Bank has a AAA credit rating. It is safer than safe. It's essentially as good as U.S. Treasuries.
So Bonga is proposing a financial maneuver where the reconstruction effort is basically borrowing the World Bank's credit score.
Yes. They go to private investors, the huge pension funds, sovereign wealth funds, and say, lend your money to the World Bank. And then the World Bank funnels that liquidity into the Reconstruction Fund.
That opens up a massive pool of private capital that simply wouldn't go near this region otherwise.
That is the strategy. He's using that rating to, in his words, reduce the risk of private investment. It's high-level financial engineering to bridge the gap between an active war zone and global capital markets.
That is actually a really clever way to de-risk it. But hold on, if I am an investor, even if I trust the World Bank to pay me back my principal, I'm probably still worried about where the money goes once it hits the ground.
Of course.
I mean, we are talking about a high-risk environment for fraud, corruption, diversion of funds.
And Bonga knows that perfectly well. That was the second half of his pitch. He assured the room that there would be robust financial, legal, and oversight mechanisms.
He had to look the donors in the eye and promise to track every cent.
He had to, because if this money starts disappearing into corrupt pockets, or worse, gets diverted to rearm combatants, the bond yields will spike, the donors will flee, and this entire complex mechanism just collapses.
Okay, so we have the mechanism built, we have the credit card.
Right.
Now let's talk about the credit limit. Because a fancy financial mechanism is totally useless if nobody actually puts cash in the account. What kind of numbers did they announce at this DC meeting?
We got some very hard numbers, and they tell a fascinating geopolitical story. The headline number naturally came from President Trump. The United States pledged $10 billion.
$10 billion. That is a massive chunk of change. Did they specify what exactly that $10 billion is for?
They did not, and that is a very notable detail.
Really? Just a blank check?
It's a headline number. It signals to the world the U.S. is in. But by not specifying if it's for humanitarian aid, infrastructure, or administration, it gives the administration total flexibility on how that money is actually deployed later.
Okay, so the U.S. puts $10 billion on the table. Who else stepped up?
This is where the pledge list gets really interesting. They are calling it the Coalition. It is a group of 9 member countries that collectively pledged another $7 billion.
I'm looking at the list of those 9 countries now. You have Kazakhstan, Azerbaijan, the UAE, Morocco, Bahrain, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Uzbekistan, and Kuwait.
Now, what stands out to you about that list?
It's very eclectic. You've got Central Asia, you've got North Africa, and obviously the Gulf states.
Yeah.
But it's not just the traditional Arab League players.
It is a very specific, deliberate slice of the Muslim world. Kazakhstan, Azerbaijan, Uzbekistan, these are secular Muslim majority nations from the former Soviet sphere.
Right.
It feels like a broader Islamic coalition that the U.S. has cobbled together to give this whole project international, multi-regional legitimacy.
That makes sense. It dilutes the narrative that this is just a Western imposition if you have countries like Uzbekistan involved.
Exactly. And financially speaking, the heavy lifting within that coalition is coming from the usual suspects. Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and Kuwait specifically contributed $1 billion each.
Okay, let's do the quick math. $10 billion from the U.S. plus $7 billion from the coalition. That is $17 billion raised in one afternoon, which, on the surface, sounds like a massive diplomatic success.
It sounds like a lot of money, yes. And in a vacuum, $17 billion is incredible. But we have to bring in the reality check here. We have to look at the other side of the ledger.
Right. The actual bill for the damages.
The bill. The assessments from the UN, the World Bank, and the EU have all come to roughly the exact same conclusion regarding the cost.
Which is?
The cost to rebuild Gaza after the devastation we've seen is estimated at $70 billion.
Wow. $70 billion. So we raised 17.
And the target is 70.
We are looking at a massive shortfall. That's less than a quarter of the total need.
It's less than a quarter. And the timeline makes it even tighter. You don't just spend $70 billion on day one.
Right. There are phases to construction.
Exactly. The initial recovery phase alone, and this is just to get the absolute basics back online, we're talking water, basic electricity, clearing the main roads. That phase needs $20 billion over the first 3 years.
So even with this huge summit, with the presidential seal, the World Bank, the wealthy Gulf states, they haven't even fully funded the initial 3-year recovery target.
Correct. They were currently $3 billion short of just the initial recovery phase and $53 billion short of the total project cost.
Oh, wow.
Trump said at the meeting, and I quote, "Every dollar spent is an investment in stability."
It's a great quote.
It is a great sentiment. But right now, that investment portfolio is severely underfunded.
So it feels like they have built this incredible engine, the World Bank mechanism, but they only put enough gas in the tank to maybe get out of the driveway.
That is a very fair analogy. And the real danger here is that in a post-conflict reconstruction scenario, speed is everything.
Because people need homes.
Right. If you don't show tangible progress quickly, if people are still living in temporary shelters 3 years from now because the council is waiting for the next round of bond funding, political instability rises.
Despair sets in.
Exactly. Despair breeds resentment. And that perfectly transitions us to the other major pillar of this Washington meeting.
The security infrastructure. Because you can raise $70 billion, you can issue all the AAA-rated private bonds you want, but you cannot rebuild a power plant if someone is going to blow it up the next week.
Precisely. Capital is cowardly. It flees conflict. So, to make this complex financial plan work, they need a security environment that is totally ironclad.
Which introduces us to the IES, the International Stabilization Force.
Yeah.
Now, looking at the troop composition for the IES, it's really surprising. This is not your typical UN or NATO lineup.
It is a very deliberate departure from the usual suspects.
The countries putting boots on the ground are Indonesia, Morocco, Kazakhstan, Kosovo, and Albania.
Look at the pattern again, just like the donor coalition.
They're all Muslim-majority nations, but mostly not direct neighbors to the conflict.
Exactly. And the detail that really made me say aha when reading the security briefings was the massive role being played by Indonesia.
Yeah, that jumped out at me too. I mean, Indonesia is thousands and thousands of miles away.
Yeah.
But they promised up to 8,000 troops.
8,000 troops is a massive commitment for an expeditionary force. And they are not just providing basic infantry. Indonesia accepted the position of deputy commander for the entire IES force.
Why Indonesia? Why are they the linchpin of the security apparatus here?
It all comes down to optics and legitimacy on the ground.
Okay.
If you put U.S. Marines or British soldiers on the street corners, the local narrative immediately becomes one of Western occupation.
Right. That triggers a whole historical resistance.
Exactly. But if you use Egyptian or Jordanian troops, you run into very complicated regional baggage, border politics, and accusations of them acting as proxies.
So Indonesia bypasses both of those problems.
Yes. It is the world's most populous Muslim nation. It's viewed as relatively neutral when it comes to internal Middle Eastern politics. Having an Indonesian soldier patrolling a neighborhood sends a message of Islamic solidarity and protection rather than occupation or regional meddling.
That is extremely clever branding for a military force. But the actual command structure is still Western, isn't it?
At the very top, yes. The overall commander of the IES is Major General Jasper Jeffers.
So the U.S. maintains its hand on the steering wheel when it comes to strategy and rules of engagement.
Right. But the face of the personnel actually interacting with civilians at checkpoints will be Indonesian, Moroccan, Kosovar.
It's a true hybrid model. Western command structure with global South manpower.
Exactly. And we also shouldn't overlook the local policing aspect of the plan. Soldiers are built for border security and counterinsurgency. Police are needed for street crime, traffic, and daily public order.
So who handles the police?
The plan tasks Egypt and Jordan with training the territory's local police forces.
Ah, so the direct neighbors are involved, but strictly in a training and capacity building role.
Right. Keeping them off the frontline patrols, but utilizing their expertise. The long-term scale of this security plan is huge. They are aiming for 20,000 IES troops and 12,000 newly trained police officers.
That's 32,000 security personnel.
Yeah.
That is a very dense footprint for a territory the size of Gaza.
It's a significant saturation. If you compare it to historical peacekeeping missions, it clearly shows that the planners are anticipating a lot of friction. They are not expecting a parade.
Yeah.
And it's worth noting, they're beginning the initial deployment in the Rafah sector down in the south.
Okay, so let's synthesize the board here. We have the banker, which is the World Bank. We have the director, which is the Peace Council. And we have the muscle, the IES.
Yes.
On paper, sitting in a conference room in Washington, D.C., this looks like a remarkably cohesive, thoughtful plan. They have addressed the finance, the political optics, and the physical security.
On paper, it is a beautiful piece of bureaucratic engineering. It checks every single box.
Right.
But, and this is a massive, but we have to look at the actual ground context.
Right.
We have to anchor ourselves in the current date. It is February 2026.
And the backdrop to this high-level meeting is not exactly peaceful.
No. This meeting is taking place months after the official ceasefire was supposed to take effect. If you recall Trump's 20-point peace plan, The ceasefire was set for October 10th, 2025.
So we are about 4 or 5 months into this supposed ceasefire. How is it actually holding up according to the security briefings?
The specific word used repeatedly in the reports to describe the current status is fragile.
And fragile in a military briefing usually translates to barely working at all.
Exactly. It means the shooting hasn't fully stopped. We have to report impartially here that both sides are constantly exchanging accusations of violations.
Right.
The documents explicitly note that Israeli airstrikes have continued to cause casualties in recent weeks.
So just imagine you are an Indonesian soldier deploying to the Rafah sector. You are told this is a post-conflict stabilization mission, but airstrikes are still actively happening in your sector.
It is an incredibly dangerous operational environment, and it completely complicates the financial reconstruction we talked about. How do you ensure a construction crew clearing rubble when the ceasefire is violated weekly?
How do you convince those private sovereign wealth funds to buy AAA bonds if they turn on the news and see fresh strikes?
You don't. And what about the human toll? We've talked about billions of dollars and troop saturation numbers, but the reality for the people living there is grim.
You pulled a really striking quote from the source material about that from Ali Sheikh.
Yes, Ali Sheikh. He is the chief commissioner of the National Committee for the Administration of Gaza. He was actually at this D.C. meeting, rubbing shoulders with all the donors and generals.
What was his assessment of the situation?
He did not sugarcoat it for the cameras. He stated plainly that his team is operating under extremely difficult conditions.
Understandably.
He described large parts of the territory as severely damaged, destroyed in fact, and he explicitly noted that public order remains fragile.
There's that word again. Fragile.
It's the defining theme of the moment. Fragile. You have these high-level, sophisticated mechanisms, the AAA ratings, the billions in international pledges, the multinational military organizational charts, completely colliding with the ground-level reality where buildings are still rubble, basic utilities are non-existent, and public order is hanging by a thread.
It really feels like a race against time, a race between the international reconstruction effort and the lingering underlying conflict. Can the Peace Council build fast enough to actually stabilize the region before the fighting simply tears it all apart again?
That is the central defining tension of 2026. The World Bank is setting up the accounts to move the money. The IES is getting its troops ready to deploy to Rafah. But remember that massive financial gap we discussed?
Right, the gap between the $17 billion they raised and the $70 billion they actually need.
Exactly. Well, the gap between a fragile ceasefire and actual durable safety on the ground is even bigger. And if there is one thing global private investors hate, it is uncertainty.
So, bringing this all back to you, the listener, we've laid out all the mechanical pieces on the board today.
Right.
We have this novel financial mechanism using the World Bank's perfect credit as a shield for private bonds. We have a unique, multinational Islamic coalition stepping up for security. And we have a staggering $53 billion funding gap.
It's a lot of moving parts.
It is.
Yeah.
So what is the one provocative thought we should leave the listener with? What is the core question to mull over as this plays out?
I keep returning to a classic chicken and egg scenario. Think back to President Trump's quote, "Every dollar spent is an investment in stability."
The basic logic being that money creates peace.
Right. It's the economic peace theory. If people have jobs rebuilding their neighborhoods, if they have water and power, the incentive to fight vanishes.
But the reality on the ground right now suggests the exact reverse might be true.
Exactly. You might need absolute peace to even be able to spend the money. You literally cannot issue a private bond for a water desalination plant if the investors think it might get bombed before it opens.
So the real question for you to consider is, can the reconstruction money actually flow? Especially those crucial private bonds relying on the World Bank's rating if this fragile ceasefire doesn't hold.
Precisely. Wall Street might trust Ajay Banga and the World Bank entirely, but will they trust a fragile war zone? If Indonesian troops start taking fire in Rafah, do the bond yields immediately spike?
Does the capital just freeze up entirely?
And if that private money gets scared off, reaching that $70 billion goal becomes mathematically impossible.
It is a massive high-stakes gamble. Does stability bring the money, or does the money buy the stability? The international community is currently betting $17 billion on the latter.
And the next few months of deployment will tell us if that bet is going to pay off.
It is a fascinating, if very precarious, look at how the world actually tries to engineer a rebuild from scratch. We will definitely be watching those bond numbers and those troop movements very closely as the year goes on.
Absolutely. It's going to be a critical year.
Well, that is it for today's deep dive into the mechanics of the rebuild. Thanks for learning with us.
Thanks for having me.